Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for coming tonight, and thank you as well to the ACLU of Oregon for giving me this opportunity to speak at their event for the second consecutive year. Last year, I traveled there with my partner, David Miranda, also known as one of the world's most well-known detainees, or as I call him in the United Kingdom, a terrorist suspect. And we had a great time visiting Portland and a particularly great time attending the event. It was really inspiring and emboldening to be around so many people who have devoted themselves with such great success to the cause of civil liberties. And it really redoubled my conviction and my devotion towards those issues. I have had a mildly eventful year since I spoke there last. And one of the things that I was reflecting on as I was thinking about speaking tonight is the fact that I remember I stood up at the beginning of my remarks last year, and I talked about how, as somebody who works on civil liberties issues and who defends those whose civil liberties are being threatened, that I'm really grateful that there are groups like the ACLU of Oregon and all of the devoted volunteers and lawyers and executives who work within the ACLU, because as somebody who writes about those issues and who works on those issues, it's very comforting to have those kind of devoted allies and to be able to use the ACLU as such a great resource, not just for information, but more importantly, to know that there's always someone there who is going to defend people's civil liberties regardless of how politically unpopular or risky it might be. And what's interesting is that I'm now not somebody who merely works on civil liberties or defends those whose civil liberties are in doubt. I'm actually somebody whose civil liberties are very much in doubt at the moment. I wish I could be there with you in person. That was the plan when I was asked to speak, and if we had a government who could be counted on to defend basic First Amendment guarantees, I would be there. But since we don't have that kind of government, I'm not. And I've been the subject of all sorts of threats and arguments about reasons that I should be criminally prosecuted or arrested if I come back to the United States for the journalism that I've done, including a pretty serious coordination and escalation over the past 3 weeks from top-level officials in the Obama administration who have called the journalists who have worked on this story accomplices of Edward Snowden, and who have deliberately concocted very extremist theories in order to justify why the journalism that we've done could be the subject of a criminal investigation. And so now, as somebody whose civil liberties are directly being called into question myself, as somebody whose conversations have been confirmed to be monitored by the government, whether the United States government or the British government or other governments, I'm even more grateful that there is an organization like the ACLU generally, and like its most robust and significant affiliates, which certainly includes at the very top of the list the ACLU of Oregon, because when you are threatened that way by the government, when your rights are being called into question, it is incredibly important to know that you have allies who have resources and abilities and passion to defend those civil liberties. And so I sleep a lot better at night knowing that groups like the ACLU of Oregon, the ACLU national organization exist, and it's extremely important that they be supported and funded in every way possible by those who share these civil liberties values. So I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about the disclosures. When I was speaking last year to this organization, I spent a good amount of time talking about the concept of civil liberties, because civil liberties is a term that gets thrown around all the time, and very few people ever stop to think about what it actually means. And I talked about the meaning of civil liberties, and I explained that to me it's a fairly simple concept. It's essentially the list of lines that we, the people, have told the government they're not permitted to cross in the exercise of their power. And this list is enshrined in a single document, which makes it easy to find, called the Constitution. And one of the most important lines that we, the people, established and imposed on the government is set forth in the Fourth Amendment, that says that there shall be no unreasonable searches and seizures, that only upon probable cause shall warrants issue. And if you go back and read what spawned the American Revolution and the American founding, not ancillary to their concerns, but central to them, was the idea that general warrants, a instrument used by the king to subject entire communities to searches without regard to whether there's evidence of wrongdoing, was incredibly repressive and tyrannical. And it was one of the things that fueled the American Revolution, the idea that only specific people who are suspected with evidence of wrongdoing shall be subjected to surveillance. And the very first story that Edward Snowden pointed me to when we met, the very first story that I published at The Guardian that broke the story, showed that the U.S. government was doing everything that the Constitution was designed to prohibit, was wildly crossing the lines that we the people have imposed on them by collecting the telephone records and communications data, not of individuals who they demonstrated with evidence were guilty of wrongdoing or were likely guilty of wrongdoing, but all of us, hundreds of millions of us as citizens, indiscriminately without regard to whether there was anything that we were doing that was wrong. Even James Clapper, President Obama's top national security official, just last week said in an interview with the Daily Beast that upon reflection, meaning after everything that's happened, after the way the U.S. government has been discredited, after he got caught lying to the Senate, after everything that's happened, he said, I guess maybe in retrospect, it probably would have been a good idea for us to have told the American people that we were actually subjecting them to this mass system of suspicionless surveillance. A pure vindication of Edward Snowden, given that he knew, Edward Snowden did, that none of that would be revealed, that we would remain blind to this in a democracy unless he came forward and did what he did. And I think this really underscores the critical point here, which is that in the wake of 9/11 in particular, all of the institutions designed to bring transparency to the U.S. government have completely and disgracefully failed in those efforts. We have a U.S. Congress that instead of exercising oversight, vigorously cheerleads for the national security state. We have a media that instead of serving as watchdogs over those who wield power, serve as spokespeople for them, as lapdogs, making sure that whatever views they want published are amplified without investigation. And then we have a court system that instead of safeguarding constitutional rights against the government when they try and encroach it against the most powerless, concoct all sorts of reasons, really cheat, has the federal judiciary, when it comes to endorsing the theories of the federal government, especially when it involves American Muslims and other marginalized groups. And so all these institutions designed to bring transparency have really failed. Only one group of people has brought us and enabled transparency, from the George Bush NSA eavesdropping scandal to torture to rendition to the abuses of Abu Ghraib and all sorts of other scandals culminating in the current NSA one. And those people are whistleblowers. And there are very few organizations that have really stood by whistleblowers, people who allow us in a democracy to know what our government is doing. And the ACLU of Oregon has stood by whistleblowers in Oregon who have been persecuted. The ACLU nationally has done so. And as I said, Ben Weisner has been nothing short of heroic in his efforts to defend at all costs, whether it means it's politically unpopular or he's attacked, one of the most successful and important whistleblowers of our time, and that's Edward Snowden. And so I feel like the work that we as journalists have done over the last year, the work that Edward Snowden as a whistleblower has done over the last year, and the work that the ACLU and Ben have done over the last year really are in the grand tradition of being the last line of defense against these lines that we've imposed on the government, what really are our basic liberties. That's the work that the ACLU of Oregon exists in your state every single day to do. Without them, those lines would be very easily crossed, but with them, we have protections against the government and others who wield power crossing them. And they can only be effective, they can only defend your basic liberties and mine if we in return do everything possible to support them. So, I want to leave you with that sentiment that I'm really thankful for everyone who came tonight. I'm particularly grateful to the ACLU of Oregon for asking me to speak, and to Ben for all the work that he's done over the last year with my source, but also with me. But I also hope that all of you, in the spirit of everything that you're hearing tonight, get inspired to support the ACLU of Oregon in whatever ways you can, because they not only deserve it, but we do as well. Thank you very much again, and have a great evening.